Welcome to Austen Mondays, everyone. I am your host, Deborah G. Pettit from the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And for 24 weeks, we're going on a biblio-venture with Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. In each episode, I talk with a special guest, a brilliant Austen scholar, creator, or Janeite about Austen and her works. And then I have an hour-long conversational annotation with a chapter co-host, in which we illuminate, elucidate, explicate a few chapters of Pride and Prejudice. And our special guest for today's episode is author Deboarh Yaffe. Hello, Deborah. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
All righty. Well, I'm so happy to have you and be here after a little while when we were not here for a couple of weeks. More with Deborah in a moment, everybody. And stay tuned for our chapter annotation segment tonight when Dr. Kathleen Hudson joins me to talk about chapters 10 to 12 in an episode we're calling A Turnabout the Room at Netherfield. And we are here this week. Streaming issues the last couple of weeks delayed our reading journey, but we're back. Next week, we'll have a special show on Tuesday night for 1 week only. It will be Austen Tuesdays, so we can make up some time, and then we'll return to Mondays. So there's only one show next week, and it's on Tuesday, and then we'll be back to Mondays. We've also extended the series to end on March 20th instead of March 13th. So the new schedule is posted on our Rosenbach webpage. You can find it there. And I've had lots of emails and messages of encouragement over the last couple of weeks. And I want to thank all of you for your loyalty, patience, and affection. I really am glad this show means as much to you as it does to me. And if I could just call out thanks to Rena, Roberta, Diane, Jocelyn, Dee from Martha's Vineyard, Susan, Laura, Pat, Lindsay, Beverly, and especially Chelsea, who I ran into on a street near the Rosenbach, and she told me how much that she's been enjoying the show. You guys are all the best, and it does make me happy to do Austen Mondays for you. If you're watching live on Zoom tonight, which is where we are, enjoy yourselves in the chat. And if you have a question for me or Deborah or later for Kathleen, put your questions in the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll try to get to them during the show. But if you're watching this recording on YouTube, then feel free to put any questions or comments you may have in the comment section of YouTube, and I'll answer them there. Let's get on with the show. For today's Turnabout the Room, please welcome Deboarh Yaffe. Deborah is an award-winning newspaper journalist and author and has been a passionate Jane Austen fan since first reading Pride and Prejudice at age 10. Ooh, we're going to hear about that in a minute. Her second book, Among the Janeites, A Journey Through the World of Jane Austen Fandom, was published in August 2013 and has been revered by Janeites everywhere ever since, especially me. Yaffe holds a bachelor's degree in humanities from Yale University, a master's degree in politics, philosophy, and economics from Oxford University in England, which she attended on a Marshall Scholarship. She works as a freelance writer, has 2 grown children, and lives in Central Jersey with her husband and her Jane Austen action figure. Mine's right behind me, right over there, up the sign. So thanks for coming, Deborah. This is really awesome to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Good. Before we get into your work on this book and talk about Janeites and Austen fandom, what was your Pride and Prejudice moment, discovery moment in your life?
So, well, I know when I first read Pride and Prejudice, I was 10, and that's been a few years. And so I cannot say that I have a strong memory of my reaction to the book. So it's not as perfect a story as I would like it to be. But I was a precocious and voracious reader, and my father was a college English professor with a special fondness for 19th century novels, especially Dickens, who I see over your shoulder there.
My kids cope with this all the time. So
there you go. So my father, when I was about 10, my father started like feeding me classic literature, and it started me with Dickens. And then the summer that I was 10, we went on a family vacation. This was pre-Kindle days, so I took along like a suitcase full of books. I read them in like 10 minutes, and I was really bored. And so he went out to a bookstore and came back with a paperback of Pride and Prejudice. So that was the first time that I read it. And I know that I must have liked it because I went ahead and read the rest of her novels in the next year or so. But I don't have a strong memory of what I liked about it. And it did take a while, I would say, for Jane Austen to become like a especially important writer to me. But by the summer I was 16, we went on a family trip to England. We went to Chawton Cottage, where, as you know, Jane Austen lived for the last 9 years of her life and wrote and revised all of her novels. And I really loved it there. And my parents saw a leaflet for the Jane Austen Society of North America, which at that point was only a few years old. And so they picked up a leaflet and they bought me a membership. And so that was the beginning of my experience of being part of the fan community of Jane Austen, which is different than just being a solo Jane Austen reader, as being part of that fan community.
Do you remember what that experience was like, being at Chawton, and how?
Yeah, I just remember wandering through, and this is the thing. Jane Austen, of course, was well known and considered to be a very important novelist, but the level of fan obsession with her, I think, is a little bit later creation. So at least in my memory, Chawton was not packed with visitors. And so it was possible to sort of have a kind of feeling of wandering through and communing with the spirit of Jane Austen and reading all the little wall tags and feeling like you were really part of it. And that was the experience that I had, at least as I remember, that I just felt like immersed in this presence of this writer. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience.
So how did the book come about then? Was this, I mean, let's talk about, like, your life has been doing this, though, involved in Austen, and then it finally becomes, so you continue with Austen?
Yeah, so I went to my first JASNA, Jane Austen Society of North America, annual meeting in my freshman year of college. It was actually in Philadelphia, and I was going to college in Connecticut, so I just took the Amtrak down and went to it. I think I was the youngest person there. Had a great time discussing Emma with all of these fellow Jane Austen fans who were old enough to be my parents. And then I just continued to read Jane Austen and be into her. But there weren't a lot of other people around who were as obsessed with Jane Austen as I was. And so it kind of percolated along. And then in the early 2000s, I guess I read the book, The Jane Austen Book Club by Karen Joy Fowler, which is about a group of 6 people who get together to read Jane Austen's novels. And I thought, oh, that would be fun. So I kind of started a group like that with my neighbors. And we were reading Pride and Prejudice, and the entail is important in the plot of Pride and Prejudice, as I guess your group already knows. And so I went online to try to find a little bit of like information about what was an entail and what was the legal issues. And I stumbled across the Republic of Pemberley, which was at that point the largest online Jane Austen fan site, and had at that point an incredibly active message board filled with people who were just talking a lot about Jane Austen's novels in a lot of excruciating detail, which I just loved, right? So I found this website because I was looking for information about the entail, which they did have some of. And then I just was like, oh, these are my people. Where have you been all my life? So I just became obsessed with this website. I was spending so much time on this website doing all this chit chatting about, whether Darcy and Elizabeth, or whether Elizabeth is subliminally attracted to Darcy, even though she claims she doesn't like him, and all this kind of thing. And I was supposed to be finishing another book at the time. So it was a little bit of a procrastination effect as well. And my husband would like come upstairs, and I would like oh my God, I'm on Pemberley again. I should like log off quickly. It was like, this was an illicit thing I was doing. And so I started telling him about, the Republic of Pemberley and how it was kind of like a little Jane Austen village of its own. We had our Mr. Collinses and our Miss Bateses, the people that you saw their names and you kind of rolled your eyes a little bit. But, there was a lot of really smart, interesting discussion going on. And he said to me, you should write a book about that. And I was like, oh, that would be so fun, but I wonder if I can do it, if I'm really funny, right? I'm not really a funny writer, all this kind of stuff. But he just kept nagging me about it for like a couple of years. And eventually I was like, oh, all right, fine. You're right. I should do it. So that's how the book happened.
Well, and it worked well. And I want to hear whether or not you think Elizabeth has an undying when they first meet. Maybe that's a question I'll save for the end here.
Okay.
And I love the way you laid out this book, that you went on the journey yourself. You went and visited places and talked to people, and then recounted all in different. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So, by this point, I had been part of the community for a long time, and I had been to several JASNA AGMs, and and then I went to another couple more when I was thinking about writing the book to get a little bit of sense of what the material should be. So I knew there were aspects of the fandom that I definitely wanted to address. I knew that I wanted to write something about cosplay. I knew that I wanted to go on a Jasna has these annual trips to Jane Austen sites in England, and I thought joining a trip like that would be a lot of fun. Plus, I would have an excuse to go, which I couldn't otherwise really justify financially. And you know, I knew that I wanted to write something about academic approaches to Jane Austen versus popular approaches to Jane Austen, and things like that. So some of that I already knew, and then I sort of started paying attention and noticing there were interesting things out there. Like there was this guy named Ernie Pearlstein who was a very controversial figure on the Republic of Pemberley because he had these complicated ideas about sort of shadow stories subliminally going on in the works of Jane Austen that a lot of people totally disagreed with. So I thought he was kind of an interest, you know, the idea that there's somebody whose theories about Jane Austen are so far out that other fans are annoyed by them. You know, that was kind of a funny aspect. So I knew that I wanted to address different aspects of the fandom, and I needed to find, to some extent, to find people whose stories could tell about those aspects of the fandom. Like, so for instance, the cosplay aspect. At a Jasna AGM that I went to, I ran into a woman named Veranda Bradley, who was dressed in beautiful Regency costumes that she had made for her, and she dressed in costume for the entire conference. And so I thought, okay, you know, maybe Veranda, I'll meet Veranda, I'll talk to Veranda in more detail, I'll get her story, and she'll be kind of the person who tells the cosplay story aspect of this fandom. So that was kind of how I put it together. And there's a chapter about the internet and the way that the internet kind of supercharged Jane Austen fandom in the mid-90s as well. If I was writing the book now, there would be chapters that aren't there probably that I would write now, but you know, the book was written when it was written. So
hey, let me remind everybody watching on Zoom that when you use the chat, use everyone, so everyone can use you right above your where you put the message. That you can do to hosts and panelists or to everyone. It defaults to hosts and panelists. So change to everyone so we can all see it. And if you have a question for Deborah, put it in the Q&A function on Zoom, and then I can get it from there. You guys are so chatty, which I love, but I can't follow the chat and show at the same time. But if you put a question in the Q&A, I'll get to it. But you've also, I guess you've also continued your fandom too, because you still continue to go to AGMs.
Oh yeah. They're really the most fun you can have without laughing, to paraphrase Woody Allen. So, you know.
So this wasn't like an outsider looking in. You were in, but had the opportunity of showing.
Oh yeah. I mean, you know, there was a book written by a woman named Claire Harmon, maybe 15 or so years ago, a little more, which was called Jane's Fame. Yeah. And it was a book about Jane Austen reception history. And it ended with a chapter about contemporary Austen fandom that I was dissatisfied by. I thought it was kind of fast and superficial and not very interesting. And Maggie Sullivan, who is the editor of the wonderful Austen blog, when she reviewed that book, said something like, what we really need is a book about Jane Austen fans written by one of us, someone who won't be embarrassed to be seen wallowing. So I was like, that's me. I am not embarrassed to be seen wallowing. So that actually was a line in my book proposal. I quoted Maggie Sullivan saying that was the book that we needed. So that was kind of how I addressed it. I thought that I have the skills of a reporter, the ability, I hope, to talk to people and draw them out and get a sense of how to tell a story. But I also was part of this story. So that was, I thought that, to me, that was a fun part of doing the book, was to have both those dimensions going on at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Do you find there's still I mean, it's always been there, that tension between, and you have it, you address it a bit in one of the chapters, is that tension between the academic world and their, you know, and the way they approach Austen and the way fandom does. And do you find that it's becoming less condescending as the years go on, or is it still the same?
I mean, you know, a lot of this is at the interpersonal level, right? So I know many academics who are not condescending at all.
And that's what's so great about this.
Other general fans who are, you know, you don't have to have a PhD to be condescending. But so I think that, you know, there's always bound to be a tension in a community. I guess there's no human community that is too small to have factions, right? Mm-hmm. So there's always going to be a tension, because there are going to be different ways that people appreciate something that they all feel really strongly about. I mean, what I love about going to a Jasna AGM is that the bottom line is that we all love Jane Austen. Some of us think that she's a wonderful, warm, fuzzy, escapist, cozy writer. And some of us think she's an edgy, satirical, subversive feminist writer. And some of us think she's a devout Christian. And some of us think that she, is fundamentally at odds with all the institutions of her society. But we can all meet together and agree that we think she's wonderful and that she's worth talking about, and that every time you talk about her, you'll find new things in her. And that for me is what I like about the community. And so sure, there are tensions, but for the most part, I don't, those tensions don't usually manifest in direct person-to-person relationships. Usually it's a more global kind of thing where people might say, oh, those academics, they suck all the joy out of reading. But, for the most part, it's not.
One of the things I love is, especially about Austen and some of these, especially authors or books that hit this kind of pop culture popularity, is that it then draws scholars and great scholars who do great work but are not demeaning about fandom as well, and lots of people that we have had on the show and we'll continue to have. Jocelyn Harris next week is what a serious great scholarly work, and but in a way that also kind of acknowledges the fun of being in a Jane Austen community that's not an academy.
So, the thing that one of the things I think is really interesting about this Jane Austen fandom, though, is the way that Jane Austen has a firm position both in the kind of academic English lit pantheon and in the pop culture pantheon. Yeah. I mean, you get, she is viewed as a giant of the novel long before there's any wet shirt Mr. Darcy in 1995. And now she is this major pop culture figure with, reams of fan fiction and tons of adaptations and updates and new interpretations and all of that kind of thing. And she's got both those positions simultaneously. I think sometimes you get the thing that becomes a big deal in pop culture, and then academics start to study it because it's big in pop culture. And that's not the direction that it went with Austen, really. She was already well established in the canon before she became a major pop culture figure. Although, as Devaney Lozer talked to you about in your first episode, Austen's pop culture presence does go back further than we necessarily realize. But I think in terms of the kind of visibility that she's had in the last 25, 30 years, that's the biggest surge in her popularity there.
Do you think we talked about, well, there's also this idea that I love that you talk about a little bit in your book, of this kind of tension between the desire for exclusivity, that like, oh, this is my Jane, my Austen. And then that desire for community, which is, like, I just want to be alone and just read my book sometimes. I'm like, that's all I want to do. But then going out and making these connections is valuable. How do you, is that where you are too?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the first Jasna AGM that I went to when I was 17, I remember at the closing event or brunch or whatever, the then president of Jasna, a wonderful man named Joe Costa, who I interviewed for my book, said something like, Jane Austen doesn't need us. She's really famous. She doesn't need us to keep her name alive. And I heard that and I remember thinking, Jane Austen's famous? Because I had always thought of her as kind of my thing. And, when he said it, I was like, oh, yeah, I guess so. I guess people have heard of her. But I had always thought of her as belonging just to me in this kind of private way. And I think a lot of people feel that way about Jane Austen. They feel a very personal connection with her. And we could talk about why that might be. But as a result, it can be kind of disconcerting when you arrive at a Jasna AGM and, this Jane Austen that you feel like so well, all these other people have this totally different idea about her. It's like, running into people who tell you that your best friend is totally different than you thought she was. So that definitely can cause some friction. But I personally just find it really like fun and stimulating and exciting.
Well, to me, it's one of the reasons I do these programs. So is to balance that part of my life. I mean, so then why do you think that people, you just say, you asked the question.
Yeah.
And, is it different for everyone?
One of the points that I try to make in my book, I decided when I was writing the book that I did not want to write another book that was like, why is Jane Austen so enduringly popular? I decided that, to me, that was kind of a question that was boring, in the sense that there are a million answers to it, and they always say both too much and too little. The answers are always things like, well, she has strong heroines and happy endings, or, Americans are really into England, something like that. And, yeah, but all of that is true of like dozens, hundreds of other 19th century novels. So, why Jane Austen? So I decided that I was not going to answer that question, that I was going to instead not ask, why is Jane Austen so popular, but kind of ask, how is Jane Austen popular? What does it look like to have this kind of love for Jane Austen? What do people do as a result of that? So that's kind of where I come from. The way that people have this very personal relationship with Jane Austen, though, is a sort of a subtopic maybe of this discussion. And to me, I think some of it has to do with the fact that her subject matter is so relatable, to use a modern buzzword. We all grow up in families. We all have parents and siblings who annoy us. Most of us, probably fall in love and have some kind of a romantic experience. Most of us have tensions in social situations where we feel more or less comfortable. All these things that come up in Jane Austen are very relatable. And her life is very, in a way, if you're going to be a genius writer, then to come out of a background like hers, where she had not very much formal education, she didn't travel widely, she didn't come from a famous and flashy family. It's kind of like, wow, if Jane Austen can write those books, anybody could. Or the flip side of that is, oh my God, what a genius she must be to have written those books without any of those other advantages that we talk about. But I think people sometimes batten on to that kind of, she's like us, she's one of us. And then from there feel like she's mine, she belongs to me.
Yeah. Cheryl just asked a question, but just about the how much do you think the tragedy of her early death, she's never married, add to the massive heroine worship that Janes have? And but it's always that, isn't it? It's for me to think about that kind of question. It's finding these personal details about her that we can then relate to. And
truthfully, they're not very many. I mean, this is the thing. You would think, given that there have been, I don't know, 25, 30 biographies of Jane Austen, you would think there must be a huge wealth of material, but there's actually really not. There's like 160 extant letters, there's 6 novels and some shorter pieces. There's a lot more information about her family, but really it's a pretty slim record, and there's not a whole lot more being discovered. And yet people still feel the need to mine that and interpret it and hold it up to the light and move it around in different ways. So it's a curious thing.
Do you think the future of this Janeite fandom, or is it just going to get bigger, or is it going to change in some ways, especially with the way social media works and our ways of experiencing texts in new ways?
I mean, arguably, we've already had peak Jane Austen fandom in the late 90s or so, around the wet shirt Pride and Prejudice, and the Republic of Pemberley saw a huge spike in its people on its chat rooms in between 95 and 2005, say, when the 2 versions of Pride and Prejudice that are most popular came out. Then there's a little falling off from that, and the fanfic, the market for traditionally published fanfic probably peaked around that same time. So I don't know in terms of numbers if it's going to necessarily grow, but people are still finding new ways to remake these stories. I mean, you think about Fire Island, which came out over the summer, which is the version of Pride and Prejudice set in a gay community on Fire Island, New York, and which had some popularity. And then the huge controversy over the Netflix Persuasion that came out just a month or so after that. People are still drawn to these stories and still want to retell them in their own way and make them somehow feel relevant. So, I think that these are really great books, and one of the ways that they're great books is that there's always something new to be found in them, and there's something new to be found in them for each individual as you read them at different times in your lives, and there's something new to be found in them for each generation as you read them and set it against whatever circumstances are going on in the world that you're living in at that particular time. So I think because the texts are so rich, I think that people will continue to return to them for that reason.
Is it just asking the obvious that is relevancy important? I mean, I wonder, is it, I mean, there's so many 19th century texts and that I read that this is a different world. Like, this has got nothing to do with me or my life, and I love it, and I want to celebrate it. And
Sure.
and I wonder. So there's a whole relevancy question I think that happens with the generation coming up now. Generation coming up now almost demands relevancy, and
Kids these days with their relevancy.
Oh no, and I agree with them. I love the way that's happening now. But I wonder if, you know, if that's just an obvious.
Yeah, I mean, what does relevant mean? Relevant just means that the work speaks to you in some way, right? I mean, that's what makes a classic, because a classic is a book that still speaks to you many years after it was originally written. And so sometimes they speak to you with their strangeness, and sometimes they speak to you with their familiarity, right? And Jane Austen actually does both. So,
or it's relevancy what changes we do, you know, as generations change, you know, they still find relevant things in it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love the way you fashion this book, where you begin, you start with your gown and then you end with that AGM. Have you ever done the Regency gown again?
No.
Okay.
I had a gown made and I wore it to the AGM as a research project. I've never been a costume person.
I like dressing up. I love dressing.
I mean, some people do, and that's wonderful. And I really love seeing the gowns at the AGMs because they're beautiful and people put incredible creativity and effort into them. Even as a kid, I was like a kid who didn't really like Halloween, you know, all that stuff. So it was kind of a big deal for me to do it. And I did it and I was like, okay, it's done. And I did not think that it was a flattering look for me. I always say to people, if I had lived in Jane Austen's era and had to wear those kinds of dresses all the time, no one would ever have married me. So I'm lucky that I didn't. So I have the gown, it's hanging in my closet. It's got some sentimental value because I wore it for the book, but I think I'm done with that.
You had asked the question or posed the question earlier about, like, when you're putting together the book, an example is like, does Elizabeth have already this kind of desire for Darcy when she first meets him? What do you think?
I don't know about first meets him, but I think that it's pretty clear that there are intense feelings there long before she admits that they are positive, intense feelings. You know, he proposes to her and she, not to spoilerize for people who haven't gotten there yet, but you know, he proposes to her and she turns him down and he leaves the house and she bursts into tears. That's a very intense emotional reaction. She does not burst into tears after Mr. Collins proposes to her and she turns him down. You know, she is interested in whether he's going to marry Anne de Bourgh. She just spends an awful lot of time thinking about how much she doesn't like him. So, you know, I would say that there is an intense pull, whether it's clearly, I wouldn't necessarily say she's in love with him, but I would say that she is attracted to something. So that's what I'd say.
Good. I like that. And we'll be exploring that. I mean, today we do the chapters where, you know, it's the back of the Netherfield.
My good opinion once lost is lost forever.
Today.
Yes.
We'll do that one. And,
great lines.
Well, thank you so much, Deborah.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
Thank you for taking a turn about the room with us today.
Absolutely.
This has been a real pleasure, and I hope we'll, we'll cross our paths somewhere in the future at an AGM, perhaps.
That would be great. Anytime. I'd be happy to show you around.
All righty. Thanks, Deborah.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Coming up next week on A Turnabout the Room and Austen Mondays, we will be joined by Jocelyn Harris. And let me take this moment to thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of fellow Austen lovers worldwide. And since starting Austen Mondays, I've been blown away by your generosity. Every donation helps to support the creation and continuation of Austen Mondays. And tonight we want to challenge ourselves in honor of it being 204 years since Pride and Prejudice was published in 1818. We are trying to raise $204 by the end of tonight. And if I have the wrong dates there, don't I? Well, we're going to try to raise $204 by the end of tonight. If everyone gives $15, by midnight tonight. We can easily hit that goal. I'll announce the final total on the Facebook group tonight so we can celebrate together. And I am, where were we at? Here we are. And at the end of tonight's show, I will also give a shout out to those who have donated or joined as members in the last couple of weeks. Even when we've had to postpone our shows, our J-Night friends have been supporting us by donating and joining, and that has been very gratifying. Lots of great in-person and virtual programs and courses coming up at the Rosenbach that we have. You can visit our site and see those. We have a course on William Faulkner's Absalom. We have a course on Paradise Lost coming up. We have a really great members only program at the Rosenbach. And let me share a picture of that and talk about that for a minute. And that is our members only Rosenbach Ball. It is a Jane Austen inspired night of dancing. Grab your dancing shoes and hold on to your wigs as we promenade through the Rosenbach's first Regency Ball. Regency dance instructor Sue Dupre will guide the evening to the melodies and music of the era. This is a members only program, and it is in person at the Rosenbach on November 12th. And Mrs. Pettit and I will be there dancing with you all if you come. So I hope you will come to the Rosenbach Ball. We also have merchandise still available. T-shirts, stickers, and buttons. And what and it's all there for you to enjoy and purchase. You can go to our website to buy this stuff, and it will be I would be very happy if you do so. Sorry, I'm a little discombobulated tonight, going back to Zoom after being on after being just on YouTube. It was so much easier doing that, and now I'm trying to remember where all the buttons are as I do this kind of stuff. So you can join us on our Facebook group page as well, Austen Mondays, for lots more info, news, links, conversation, and fun. But for today's chapter annotation segment, I want to welcome my co-host, Dr. Kathleen Hudson. Hi, Kathleen.
Hello. Hello. It's so wonderful to see you.
Thanks. Welcome back. I'm like fumbling all over the buttons here tonight. So, you know,
it's Monday night type thing.
Yeah.
I think
it's like got to switch platforms again. And now I'm feeling like, you know, yeah.
Well, I think tonight of all nights with these chapters, awkward social interactions are a must. You're just keeping true to form.
The well, and maybe to help me along, what I really need to do is enjoy the beverage I have.
I think you gotta.
Yeah. So for the drinking with Jane and Ed segment, I have this drink tonight that is actually the same drink I've been drinking for 3 weeks.
It better be good then. Yeah.
It is called His Good Opinion. It is Brandy, Pimm's Cup #1, simple syrup, dash of bitters, start over ice. I actually went no ice today. It's a little cool out today, and I thought it would be nice to have it without that. But it's for Fitzwilliam Darcy. It's a brandy. It's basically just a brandy old fashioned, I think, because old fashioned certainly suits Darcy's mindset early in the novel, especially. And I think he would use brandy instead of whiskey for this drink, so it's not a regular old fashioned. And
it's the class. The
Pimm's gives it the shot of British.
Yes, so, gotta do the Pimms. The shot of British. I love it.
So for a mocktail version, people can try ginger ale with a shot of orange juice. Enjoy. For 3 weeks, because after the last 2 shows didn't go, I had the drinks already, and I just drank them.
Might as well. You might as well.
Tonight I'm back to it. Well, tonight we have chapters 10 to 12 to talk about, and we are calling this our turn about the room at Netherfield, because that is what happens. And Welcome to the chapter annotation segment. And let's just get started. Reminder, we'll have no spoilers in our chapter annotation segments. We're only talking about what happened thus far in the novel. And we begin with chapter 10. And the day passed much as the day before, because we've been off for a little bit. It's, Jane is sick.
Poor Jane. She's been sick for so long now. She's been languishing for weeks, and yes, but she is sick. Poor Jane.
And Elizabeth is still there with her in this kind of, with Bingley and his sister and his sister Carolyn and his other sister who's married to Mr. Hurst. So it's Mr. and Mrs. Hurst and Darcy. And they're all playing cards, and this is what they do. They spend their day. I love it. Like, we have the placement of the people in the drawing room here. And this is where they all go and where they all spend their time together. There's much less of a sense of privacy in this chapter in the way Austen casts these people, that you're supposed to be there. Like, you play card, they mentioned the card table, but that's also where you read. That's also where you write letters. They're not in their own private room separate. They're all together in this room. Yeah.
And I think it does lend itself very much to how Caroline Bingley then makes it into a performance. That yes, you never get privacy. Everything that you're doing, even Darcy, who's ostensibly doing work here, he's writing letters, not necessarily all personal ones, presumably also business ones as well. But she then turns that into a stage, which is very interesting. Whereas I do love that Elizabeth, once again, may not be reading a book, but she's definitely reading a room, and is very entertained by everything that's happening around her. She's just sort of doing needlework and watching. It's like dinner and a show. Who needs cable television when you can just watch Caroline Bingley try and fail to get someone's attention?
It is, and so that's what she's doing. And Lauren Nixon, one of our other co-hosts, had mentioned to me that they're the kind of, and I love this idea, so thank you, Lauren. The tension of these unmarried people, young people, all together in this room, and that, to me, and I think that's right to think about as these next few chapters unfold. That's one of the reasons why perhaps there's clashes here and jealousy and people falling in love, is that they're all thrust together in this
and that they do build up this weird ecosystem then where everything is tested, very much so, because
they're unchaperoned.
That's true. I mean, I suppose,
legally they're not, because Mr. and Mrs. Hurst,
I was going to say, I suppose technically they're not, but they don't seem like chaperones. No. They're just sort of there, not necessarily weren't going to intervene at any
I say
point.
Legally, it's not really legally, it's just like, but social rules, this is allowed to occur. There is a married couple there, and
for the given value of married and couple and chaperone.
And Caroline is observing Darcy and talking about him writing and praising his letters, which is ridiculous praise, but you write letters so well, as she said, like, but Elizabeth, as you said, is observing all of this, and this is her. This is her grand amusement. She's much like her father. In this, as she, watches people do things and thinks of how ridiculous they are.
And it's an interesting one too, because I suppose so. It's Caroline trying to get a response, and Darcy really being kind of recalcitrant the entire time of contradicting her, or simply not answering her. He made no answer. He was silent. He sort of dryly tells her to, stop talking. Basically, I'm writing. You've told me several times to say hi to my sister. That it's all about perspective, I suppose, because up to this point, obviously Elizabeth's view of Darcy is potentially that he is proud and recalcitrant, and that this is a sign of a negative character. But kind of reframing that, we would think less of him if he was buying into Caroline's sort of attitude here. So that, kind of reading it one way, it's not very flattering to Darcy, but reading it another way, you do get the sense that he thinks, as Elizabeth does, that while this maybe isn't amusing, it is certainly not appealing either.
He recognizes immediately what Caroline's trying to do.
Yes,
and he does not find it amusing.
No,
but
I am not amused.
But he does not find it improper, and he does not. I think, and we learned this about his character, he doesn't think this kind of behavior is wrong. That it's okay for her to act this way because she's not breaking, the
any kind of rule. Yes.
Of decorum.
But I feel like he is coming right up to the edge of rude, which is interesting because he is very conscious of rudeness, and what is considered rude and what isn't. But he himself seems to me to be always kind of just pushing up right against the, but now you're being a little bit short.
That's tough to assess too, because I think our very contemporary, conception of rudeness is going to be different from people in living in the world of this book, and that there is an acceptance of a condescension from a higher class that is not rude in and of it, in the same way we would find that rude. And Darcy, I don't think, ever breaks those rules.
No. But Elizabeth does also too push up right against some sort of boundary of, what she should or shouldn't say.
Yeah. Well, Bingley jumps in now, and starts, about the difference between, and then we get into this kind of whole difference in the way the two of them write about their characters. But the change that I like to see, and what I like to think about too, because is that how Elizabeth comes in, and this is Elizabeth's entry into the conversation now. Like she's not gonna jump in when Caroline and Darcy are going back and forth. I think,
because they're entertainment for her.
And also then that puts her in that's gonna kind of put her in the position where Caroline is. Like, I'm competing for your attention.
Yes,
she doesn't want to do. But once Bingley jumps in, then she can enter the conversation by praising Bingley and, and his character. And Darcy says that the way he writes kind of about like, oh, I just do it quickly and sloppily is actually a kind of boast, because, that means that he's more interesting because, and Elizabeth jumps in to kind of defend him on that.
And again, given that then evolves into, this throughout the novel discussion of pride and what is pride and what is humility and what's false humility, it's interesting to bring that up so quickly, is that Darcy has a view of humility as often only carelessness of opinion and sometimes an indirect boast, which is again straight out of the kind of sensibility novel idea, and that you shouldn't. False humility is just as bad as it's a form of false pride. That he's coming from a discourse about that and takes the moment to articulate that at Bingley's expense, but it is something where you do almost, I think, because again it's a lot of, as Lauren said, a lot of young unmarried people, that there is suddenly a tension between people who are friends, that they are critiquing each other's characters, maybe not always in the most flattering of ways.
And then it turns into this kind of thing about yielding to the persuasion of a friend. And to yield without conviction is no compliment in the understanding of either. And then is it Elizabeth? Who is this now? You appear to me, Mr. Darcy, to allow nothing for the influence of friendship and affection. This is Elizabeth now. Right? Am I right there? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm right in the conversation. And but this whole influence of friendship and affection, and then she says, we may as well wait perhaps till the circumstance occurs before we discuss the discretion of his behavior thereupon. no spoilers, but put a pin in that conversation because that comes up. Darcy's influence over Bingley is because of their, you know, friendship and affection and what he thinks I mean, not only with Bingley, but also what Darcy thinks well of Bingley and wants to influence.
And it is just a recurring thing, I think, too, throughout Austen,
It'll
this idea of how much influence other people have on you. And, you know, if you don't listen to other people, is that stubbornness or is that conviction? And if you do listen to other people, is that wisdom or is that being a doormat? You know, that's something Austen, I'm sure, certainly comes back to quite a bit. And I think she has a very nuanced approach to it in this novel in particular. And again, I can't go into spoilers, but you know, that she is playing with the nuances of both of those approaches of that balancing act of taking advice, basically. You know, when do you take advice? When is it good to do so? What does that say about your character? You know, when you listen to other people and they influence you in some way.
It's the crux of what happens in Persuasion, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's not even a spoiler for a novel. It's the
title.
The reason why it's the reason why the relationship doesn't start in the begin with or ends between Anne and Wentworth is that she has been persuaded out of it, that that influence her, and then it becomes her trying to deal with that and come back from it. And so it's there.
But even in that novel too, recognizing that there are times when that is appropriate, you know, to listen to other people. This is one of those conversations too, when particularly compared to what just a page earlier was the Darcy Caroline conversation. They should have just got married then. Like I was rereading this for this session, and I was like, man, yeah, they have it bad. And I feel it just even this, and they don't know it. But when you can find someone who you enjoy arguing with, that's probably some kind of accomplishment here, where your kind of argumentation is the same. Because what I get from this is that they seem to be enjoying themselves. Certainly Darcy is enjoying this conversation much more than he was Caroline, and doesn't seem to be, you know, doesn't find it unpleasant, and neither does Elizabeth, because they're just plowing through it. So I'm just like, you fools, you don't even know, you're in the middle and you don't even know.
So you think Elizabeth is already sold? Well, inside.
No, well, not sold. I think she is. I think there is that definite attraction there. Not
She's
sold.
Attracted already.
Sold is too much.
Okay.
But
we're going to talk about, because Darcy, we got something here, but with Elizabeth, we don't get that.
Darcy, I do very much appreciate Darcy realizing, probably too, you know, he is in some danger here. I appreciate that very much for Darcy. I don't think Elizabeth knows at all, but I do think that there is that level of, I don't even necessarily want to say attraction, because that seems, but it's a pull. It's certainly a pull. She does seem to, because she enjoys riling him up, and because she enjoys arguing. And we really haven't seen, I don't think up to this point, really too many characters who have set themselves up as Elizabeth's equal. I mean, she loves Jane, but Jane doesn't talk to her like this. And she defends Bingley, but Bingley, we've established, is sort of the opposite of Darcy. You know, Charlotte, maybe there's that back and forth, and Jane does give some good advice. But this is someone who she is talking to, and the back and forth is so quick and sharp, and that they're equals, you know, to yield readily to this persuasion of a friend is no merit with you, to yield without conviction. I mean, it's just back and forth, and that they have this very, you know, again, they are matching each other. And there haven't been too many instances prior to this where we've seen that with Elizabeth. We know that she's loyal, we know that she loves certain people, but we also know that those people aren't very similar to her fundamentally. So does she know? No. And Darcy, I don't think knows the full extent of the danger he's in. But
well, I don't know if he does. He may, because, and we'll hit that in a little bit, because you know, it's after Bingley, you know, kind of has this little speech about, you know, oh, of course I have to do whatever Dorothy says. He's such a great tall fellow, you know, blah blah. And then it says Mr. Darcy smiled, but Elizabeth thought she could perceive that he was rather offended. And it's that Elizabeth thought she could perceive, which triggered for me that Austen is always in control of this kind of text in this, free and direct discourse way, that she is explaining, she is only letting us know what she wants us to know. And
which is not whether or not he's actually insulted,
yeah,
but how he is perceived.
And it's Elizabeth's perception there, but then so one of the things that and then just after that, talk about some music being played, and then Elizabeth could not help observing as she hurried over some music books that lay on the instrument, how frequently Mr. Darcy's eyes, we all know how fascinated I am with eyes in this book, eyes were fixed on her. She hardly knew how to suppose that she could be an object of admiration to so great a man, and yet that he should look at her because he disliked her was still more strange. She could only imagine, however, at last that she drew his notice because there was something about her more wrong and reprehensible, according to his idea of right, than in any other person present. The supposition did not pain her. She liked him too little to care for his approbation. That kind of, way that she deals with it is,
I don't care. Yeah.
Well,
and again, it's one of the reasons why just recalling that early incident where, I as a reader really fell in love with Elizabeth as a character, her coming in with the muddy hems and not caring what anyone in the breakfast room thought about her. She just wanted to go and find Jane, who she thought was very sick. That she does give an air of not caring, and that she has her own priorities, and that other people aren't that, which is such a sharp contrast, obviously, to Caroline, who is performing very actively. But I think it's so interesting because she, again, is very close to right. She has read a lot into Darcy's character that's accurate, that he is someone with a very keen idea about what's right and what's wrong, but she has placed herself in relation to that in the wrong position. And it's sort of like picking up that maybe Darcy was offended. She is clearly studying him and is reaching conclusions, and some of them are right, but I think she can't necessarily see where she is in relation to any of that.
Yeah. And then he tries to tease her and about, oh, would you like to dance? Well, maybe you want to dance a reel. And she calls him out on that. Like, you wanted me, I know, to say yes, that you might have the pleasure of despising my taste. And he's like, oh, I don't dare. And then she lays in, and she's like, well, she has called him out on it. And she says, and then we get the narration. Elizabeth, having rather expected to affront him, was amazed at his gallantry, that he would, back off instead of continuing to tease her. And there was a mixture of sweetness and archness in her manner, which made it difficult for her to affront anybody. And Darcy had never been so bewitched by any woman as he was by her. He really believed that were it not for the inferiority of her connections, he should be in some danger. So, two things. First, I just want to mention briefly her archness. This is the second time, and it's two more times later in the novel that we get this word, and it's only for her that we get this. The last time was when Darcy did want to dance with her at the Lucas's home, and Elizabeth looked archly and turned away. And archly is cleverly, waggishly. It's kind of I think Deborah is a good-humored slyness or sauciness. I like that. Sly,
which is pure Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Pure Elizabeth. Yeah.
How can Darcy not like her? Sly and saucy the way she
but sweet, also sweet.
Yeah,
it is interesting. I think Elizabeth thinks that she is badder than she is. That she fully expects him to be affronted, which is a misreading of him, but also is kind of a misreading of her own character, because then the next thing is, she naturally has a mixture of sweetness and archness. It is one of those things that does make me wonder too about her past experiences, because she seems to, again, be I guess the phrase "fighting the last war" is kind of comes to mind, of that she has an expectation for how people in a social rank, or how she will be perceived. She may not care about it, but she does have an expectation for how she is going to be treated and how her words and actions will be perceived, which is why she says, I love overthrowing these kinds of schemes. I know how this game is played. I say this, now you're supposed to respond with that. And he doesn't do it, which in a sense, again, makes him, if we're reading her as a potentially subversive character who sees the way the game is played, so to speak, and then does her own thing anyway. Darcy too, despite being, very much sort of the rule abiding, here's what's right and here's what's wrong, has subverted her expectations, which is, I think, very interesting. And again, it's that pull where they are much more similar than they are different.
And we have to remember that this, the last bit that I read, that she's not aware of that. She's not aware that he has never been so bewitched by any woman. She reads it entirely differently. So we get to learn as readers right off the bat something that Elizabeth isn't realized herself. And that then kind of drives this tension, this romantic tension that's going to happen throughout the novel.
I do love that last line of that paragraph, though, which I think is pure Darcy. He really believed that were it not for the inferiority of her connections, he should be in some danger.
Yeah.
Honey, you're in danger. You are in danger. The inferiority of her connections
don't matter.
I'm glad that you think you've managed to wiggle out of here and that you're actually safe, but you're in danger. You're in grave danger.
And he thinks he's bewitched. Like that, or that being bewitched it's not his fault.
True.
It's all her fault. It's this it's this sweetness and archness that she's practicing that is making this happen inside me. And that's his outcome.
And of course Caroline is so proactive. It does feel like it's,
she sees what Elizabeth doesn't see. Or like,
and that men are just these passive things, but it's the women who perform.
And it's just laid right out there, her desire of getting rid of Elizabeth. She sees this right off the bat, that Darcy finds her attractive, and she's got to get her out of there.
Her solution, though, to tease him about the upcoming wedding between the two of them, I think, is probably massively backfiring in every possible way.
She first starts with the eyes, about those beautiful eyes, and then he doubles down on it, like, their color and shape, the eyelashes so remarkably fine. Like, he doubles down on that when she tries to tease him. And then she pulls the thing like, oh, well, you'll be, we shouldn't hit that yet, do we? Yeah, not yet. We still have to hit the, where you just said, where she'll pull the,
walking around though. Although I do like this, it is an interesting, and again, I think Darcy probably has a very wry sense of humor that he keeps, that parallels Elizabeth's, but that he keeps to himself, because it's the doubling down stuff where you just get the sense that he is also laughing at Caroline quite extensively. But also Caroline Bingley is rude, and he doesn't like it when she openly tries to exclude Elizabeth on their walk. He objects to that, and that there are social norms and that you can't break certain codes of rudeness.
Yeah, because I'm sorry, that last part that I didn't mention, that's where it happens. Walking together in the shrubbery. The shrubbery is where they are. And we all have Monty Python in our heads.
Yes. Sorry, I was just sitting here going through the entire skin of my head.
But and that's where, and then Darcy tries to make, but Elizabeth's like, I have no parts of this. So, I don't want to walk with you guys. She's making her stand that I'm not trying to, get into your good graces like Caroline is.
And again, she just laughs it off, which is very arch Elizabeth.
She then ran gaily off.
The picturesque would be spoilt by admitting a fourth. I'm off, and I wanted to go anyway, so this is fine.
She's not going to play those games.
No.
Well, chapter 11. Jane is the center of attention. Jane's feeling a little bit, the gentleman entered. Jane was no longer the first object. Miss Bingley's eyes were instantly turned to Darcy. But Jane is now, wait, is this, I'm sorry. Yeah, Jane can now join them in the drawing room.
They finally got her downstairs.
Yeah. And then the sisters, give her, Bingley's all about Jane, and Caroline can't, and then we get into Darcy. So Caroline moves from, moves back to trying to, Bingley said he was full of joy and attention. He sits down, he talks by her. So then Bingley and Jane kind of get removed then from this other group.
Yeah. It's interesting too, especially given the conversation we had a little while ago about reading, that we now have a display of just exactly how well Caroline reads, which is not well at all. Versus Darcy, who reads very well.
And yet, well, Darcy's sitting reading, and Caroline interrupts him, and then she talks about, she has this great quote here that you see all over the place. How much sooner one tires of anything than of a book. There is no enjoyment like reading. I see this. You see this quote on T-shirts and things like that, and yet the character saying it.
Yes. Who has exhausted by the attempt to be amused. She had only chosen the book because it is the second volume of the one Darcy is reading. Yes. I actually have that quote on a pair of socks. And it always does make me laugh because I'm like, yes, but the person saying it does not read well.
Because she proceeds to refute her claim immediately by becoming tired of her book.
yeah. Yawned again, threw it aside. Let's talk about the ball.
Bingley's going to have his ball, and it's quite a settled thing. Soon as Nichols,
I do love his very dismissive treatment of Darcy in this too, which is, well, if you mean Darcy doesn't want to go to the ball, he may go to bed if he chooses. But yes, as for the ball, it's quite a settled thing. And as soon as there's enough white soup, I'll send around my cards. I'm like, that's great. Darcy's a friend. See, that's the best kind of friend, is who is like, you don't want to go to the ball? That's fine. You go to bed. I'm having the ball.
I'm dancing with Jane. More than twice. So the mention of a servant there made me want to ask you then to, like, because we have an opportunity. We have a servant, Nichols, who's making the white soup, servant there, and this is something that you write about and do research on, the kind of presence of servants, and we haven't had them. We don't really get them present that much in this novel. We get mentions of them, but
there aren't loads of servants throughout Austen, but the ones that are in there, I do think serve as important reminders that behind all this, sort of drawing things happening in the drawing room, there's an entire machinery behind it that needs to go. He can't have a ball until all the stuff that's happening in the background happens. I'm always reminded of that part at the end of towards the end of Sense and Sensibility, where they get news of very, very important news, but the wrong news about the wrong Farrer's brother getting married from a servant. That there is this entire world that's sort of happening behind the scenes of all this, and it doesn't come up often in Austen, but when it does, again, I think it throws into this kind of sharp relief. That again, they're just sort of, these people are hanging out in a drawing room, and it is its own kind of self-contained ecosystem, except that it's a self-contained ecosystem only because there's a larger ecosystem around it that is functioning all the time. And for my money, it then sort of puts someone like Caroline Bingley, who is trying to read and then throws the book aside and is bored and is futzing around and is generally just not doing anything particularly constructive, especially coming mere chapters after talking about all the accomplishments that a woman must undertake to be considered truly a woman, a fine accomplished woman. That she isn't doing any of that is quite a contrast, I think.
We're almost to the well, one of my, I don't know, why does this expression always stuck in my head since the first time I read it? Now, Caroline needs to get Darcy's attention because he's reading and
it's been a whole 30 seconds. She needs the attention.
And it says her figure was elegant and she walked well, but Darcy, at whom it was all aimed, because she's walking about the room, was still inflexibly studious in the desperation of her feelings. So she says, Miss Eliza Bennet, let me persuade you to follow my example and take a turn about the room. I assure you it is very refreshing after sitting so long in one attitude. That turn about the room expression, it struck me the first time I read it, like there's something unusual, like it's so affected.
Yes.
But I need to ask, like, does Austen intend that to sound affected and a bit ridiculous?
Well,
go ahead.
I would say yes. I mean, I was about to make the joke that, to say one's figure was elegant and she walked well, that the best performance of femininity you could do was take a turn about the room. And again, that this harkens back to her earlier statement, that it's not enough that a woman has accomplishments. There also must be something kind of in her air, some indescribable quality, which is kind of, we're seeing now, maybe one of the few attributes that Caroline really has. I mean, she's proven that she's not particularly productive. She's not a particularly good friend. She's not good at conversation. She's not good at reading, but she can walk, which is some sort of accomplishment, I suppose. And also she performs, that this is a display, and that, we're going to take a turn about the room, almost like we're on the Home Shopping Network, and we're sort of one of those vases that they turn around so that you can see all sides of it, that we're going to put ourselves on display now as women. And I am going to look better by contrast, because and I need you to basically be my foil here. Okay,
so is that because it's Darcy's not paying attention, so then she invites Elizabeth. Is she doing it because she wants to look better by well, I guess it's both, because she knows Darcy
to attract the attention, but hopefully I think then to draw
he likes
contrast.
Looking at Elizabeth, and she knows, and now it'll enable her to look better.
Again, Caroline, I think, as a character is the classic example of drinking poison and hoping the other person will die, because she inevitably does a lot of this to herself, these things. It's like, yes, I will drag Elizabeth up and hope that I look better by contrast, and that is by no means what ends up happening, of course.
Well, she does get her to stand up, but I actually did find several examples from other 19th century works, including Trollope, where people used to use that expression.
Turn about the room.
Yes, or at least we know that people in that authors thought that was an expression this class would use in their home. Yeah. To take a turn.
I suppose, I mean, it just does seem.
I'm sure nobody in the working class is like getting up to take a turn about the room.
No, well, that's I mean, I think this is kind of assuming that you're in a hall or bigger drawing room where you can, and that you have been sitting for a while. And this is actually just the phrase I'm going to use whenever I get up and go into a room and forget why I'm going into the room, which happens quite a bit. I'm going to say, I didn't forget. I just wanted to take a turn about the room. That's what I'm going to say from here on out. I feel like that will improve my life.
Good. Well, she does, and it works. Mr. Darcy looked up, and then Caroline tries to engage him in looking up. Him watching them, and Darcy says, you either choose this method of passing the evening because you were in each other's confidence and have secret affairs to discuss, or because you are conscious that your figures appear to the greatest advantage in walking. In the first, I would be completely in your way. In the second, I can admire you much better as I sit by the fire.
I again, first time I read it, and I still, to a bit, it was always kind of a little bit shocked that he was so blunt about it. He is in no way buying into any kind of artifice or giving them the benefit of I'm not going to pretend like this is anything other than you either are talking to each other or you're displaying in front of me. And I'm just going to, I mean, it just that he would say that the quiet part out loud was always just such a shock to me. But again, I think he is more similar to Elizabeth than either of them will admit to, because that's exactly like something she would say or think.
I guess in the end too, I think that is the way he always behaved. Like
yes, yeah,
and he can. I mean, being this, being this, rich male, he can always just, I can say whatever. I can say things, and it doesn't matter if it, if it's, I don't have to be careful or tactful in a sense.
No, yeah. It's, I mean, I do think
she needs to be,
yeah.
But,
we've talked a little bit in the past about how, it's different for men and particularly men with wealth. The rules don't tend to apply to them in quite the same way for a lot of things. I mean, we see that a lot in Sense and Sensibility, that inherited wealth sort of insulates you quite a bit from consequences. But yeah, no, he seems to just very much embrace that, for sure.
And Caroline turns it into, now he's engaging. Oh, shocking, but now I can engage.
How should we punish him?
How should we punish him?
Yeah.
Elizabeth says to tease him, laugh at him, and oh, Caroline can't do that.
Yeah. And this is after too, because she also, her kind of first answer when when they're starting this conversation is ignore him. If he he declines to join them, and he could imagine but two motives for choosing for them choosing to walk up and down the room together. And when Caroline is like, oh, what could he mean? Elizabeth says, the surest way to disappoint him would be to ask nothing of it. So don't ask him, ignore him, or if that doesn't work, tease him. Which I think are two very interesting and again very Elizabethan answers to this. Is don't engage, don't give him the satisfaction, and if you must, then laugh at him while you're doing it. I guess find something in there that's funny.
I love your recasting of Elizabethan is now not about that
Shakespearean age,
but is now about the Elizabeth Bennet age.
The only queen I value here is Elizabeth Bennet, the best.
All righty. Well, Elizabeth is like, oh, laugh at, not to be laughed at. That's hilarious to laugh at people.
Yeah.
And this becomes like, oh no, you can't, Darcy says, the wisest and best of men, nay, the wisest and best of their actions may be rendered ridiculous by a person whose first object in life is a joke. And then Elizabeth's like, well, I'm not talking about ridicule. I mean, what is wise and good, but we all have our follies that we can, point out.
Which again, I think is something very redemptive in Elizabeth's character, which is she is good. She isn't just laughing for the sake of laughing. What she is always poking fun at is, as she says, whims and inconsistencies, follies and nonsense. Exactly the things that you should laugh at. Yeah, really.
But that a way that she is proud, like that's her kind of pride in doing that. And Darcy brings this up right away about or does she says he says he's avoiding things, and then she brings it up. She says such as vanity and pride, the kind of weaknesses you might avoid. And he says vanity is a weakness, but pride, where there is a real superiority of mind, pride will always be under good regulation. I mean, he's so full of it there. And she turned away to hide a smile. She knows, like, oh my God, I can't believe you just said that.
Yeah. Well, and that here too, he's revealing a little bit of misogyny, because vanity is what women have. Pride is what men have. So obviously vanity, I can't find anything good. Vanity is a weakness indeed. Pride. So yes, to turn around and basically accuse him of just having no recourse of follies and nonsense, whims and inconsistencies. It's and for him to say, it has been the study of my life to avoid those weaknesses. And then to talk about pride, yes, it's that he doesn't necessarily appreciate the irony of this.
This is exactly what she was bringing up. Like, this is exactly the kind of thing that I'm going to make fun of you about. But she hides her smile. She realizes that he would be offended by this now.
Yes.
And then he explains himself, about the follies and vices of others and their offenses against and then he says, my good opinion once lost is lost forever. And that is a failing indeed, Cradle. I mean, she's, she recognized, I mean, she says that I really cannot laugh at it. You are safe from me. But, she recognizes right off the bat that he's gone a little too far over the edge in pride and cannot recognize.
Yeah. Which again, I mean, and the earlier in the other chapter talking about, I mean, that conversation was, listening to other people and, conviction versus affection. You listen to your friends because you have affection for them, or you don't listen to your friends because your conviction is the thing that sort of triumphs over all other options. And here he is basically again admitting that, he has a temper. His feelings are not puffed about with every attempt to move them. And exactly that once it's broken, there's no fixing it, which is not, she's right. It's implacable resentment.
Yeah.
It's a shade. You've chosen your fault well. I cannot laugh at it.
But she says that's to hate everybody. And then he says, oh, well, and
yours is to willfully,
with a smile too.
Yes.
Still, and he like, this is a game, this is banter between them.
Yes. And again, this is like that other conversation was, I was reading it and I was like, just get married already, because no one else in this room can keep up.
Yeah.
I mean, Caroline is just there. This is backfired so profoundly. And earlier, Bingley basically threw himself between them because mom and dad were fighting, and he wanted it to stop so badly, that everyone around them is sort of pulling their hair out like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? But that they are just sort of almost oblivious to everyone else in the room, having this push-pull conversation between equals. And again, I think very firmly. And even this kind of deliberate misreading of each other, that
in a playful way, like they both recognize
in a playful way,
that
but
I'm doing
to
this,
say,
like,
you hate everybody and you willfully misunderstand anybody, in that they're almost true. It's almost correct. That you are taking the parts of that you're seeing and then you're sort of twisting it. They're not wrong necessarily. I mean, Darcy doesn't hate everybody, but he just admitted that his feelings are quite firm and that he has a temper. And Elizabeth doesn't necessarily willfully misunderstand everybody, but she does play with expectations and redirects it in a way. So again, they're right, but they're playful and they're wrong. And it's just it's a great Austen dialogue. It's just so good, so good. And you can see that even if they, if it's love or hate or confusion or whatever, that the draw is definitely there, very much so.
And poor Bingley's left out of it.
Yes.
Or Caroline's left out of it. Do let's have a little music. Tired of the conversation in which she had no share. I mean, she's like,
this all blew up in her face. Poor Caroline.
She didn't want this to happen.
Get that woman a martini, because it just doesn't work out for her ever.
She's thinking she's, going to leave this scene where Elizabeth is embarrassed and has to leave the room because she's so embarrassed, and it turns into, the romantic comedy movie from the 1930s, comic banter going back and forth. So,
which is really, and again, it's underestimating both of them.
And she's the one that looks ridiculous. Carolyn.
Yes. But that they are just drawing each other out is so, I think, very cool, very, very, very romantic, that they're bringing out these sort of almost hidden or at the very least underplayed elements of themselves. That both Elizabeth and Darcy, to a certain extent, hide their humor and hide their intelligence, or are not understood as being these things until they're together, and then their meeting is equals, and then it's drawing it out. They're sort of pushing each other. further and further instead of standing back and watching it, or standing back and teasing, and always sort of being, I think, a little bit isolated and kind of alone in that respect. Because I do, I mean, I know Darcy is obviously the character who seems more obviously isolated because he doesn't talk to anybody. But Elizabeth seems isolated too. I mean, she's sort of standing back and making these judgments about people. But now they're not isolated. Now they're in conversation, which is interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Well, now in chapter 12, we get we get more shenanigans, or talk about these kind of carriage shenanigans and keeping her daughters there, longer from Mrs. Bennet. And
that's her, she tries,
yeah, she tries, but Elizabeth knows, I mean, that Jane knows too. Like, Jane's like, no, I have to go home. That's it.
And I like that line about Jane, that she when she believes she's right, she can stand firm.
Yeah.
That I mean, I know Jane sometimes gets a little bit criticized as being so nice, and not understanding that again, like, Caroline is not particularly a nice person, or not fighting when she should be fighting, that she's not like Elizabeth in that, but I do like that, when she believes herself to be in the right, there really isn't anything that can deter her.
Yeah, and she needs to go home. And,
time to go home.
So they arranged that, and to Mr. Darcy, it was welcome intelligence. Elizabeth had been at Netherfield long enough. She attracted him more than he liked. And also, Miss Bingley was uncivil to her and more teasing than usual to himself. So.
Yeah, which again is in of itself a danger, that he cares so much. That's such a great, again, the complexity of Austen, that it's never just the one thing. He's it's not just that he wants Elizabeth to go because he feels he's in danger, but he is also conscious that she's in a position where she can be insulted and hurt potentially, that Caroline is being rude, and that she's teasing him, that this is dragging more attention to him, this is a layered reaction, and that the very thing that he is kind of dreading, which is Elizabeth, is also the thing he's trying to protect, which is Elizabeth.
Read the rest of that paragraph. He wisely resolved. You have that?
Yes. He wisely resolved to be particularly careful that no sign of admiration should now escape him, nothing that could elevate her with the hope of influencing his felicity. Sensible that if such an idea had been suggested, his behavior during the last day must have material weight in confirming or crushing it. Steady to his purpose, he scarcely spoke 10 words to her through the whole of Saturday, and though they were at one time left by themselves for half an hour, he adhered most conscientiously to his book and would not even look at her.
He is like, he is, he's sunk, and now he's got to work so hard to to not seem that way to others.
Yeah. And again, I like that he is steady to his purpose. He has this kind of mental commitment in his head, which we is a reflection of his character, that he is loyal. He does have a steadfastness that was something he was talking about definitely with Bingley. It's not going to help him though. It's not going to save him from this.
It leads me to think too, this whole thing, Miss Bingley was uncivil to her and more teasing than usual himself, is that's because we're getting his point of view now, and that's just the reasons he's coming up with.
Right.
Really, it's what it's really about is his admiration for her, that he is.
Yeah, he's trying to frame this as it's all just unpleasant. But yes, that the primary thing then is not to correct Caroline and say stop being rude to her, but it's I got to stop paying attention to her, and we got to sit in awkward silence now for half an hour where I'm just going to stare at my book and not even look at you. Yeah. It's such a and Elizabeth is so childish.
Yeah, it is. And Elizabeth takes leave of the whole party in the liveliest of spirits. She's totally fine. She's like, oh my God, good. I'm going to go home. This has been, I don't feel, hanging with you people has just been, I
This
guess
is just the worst.
fun,
Yeah.
this is not where I want to be.
Mhm.
And then so it's home again, jiggity jig.
Yep.
And Mr.
Not
Bennett,
welcome home cordially by their mother.
no, Mr. Bennett's certainly happy to see them. But their father, though very laconic in his expressions of pleasure, was really glad to see them. He had felt their importance in the family circle because he feels like everybody else is just too silly to talk to.
Yes. And yeah, then we hear all about what the other daughters have been doing, and we're forced to give him that sort of benefit of the doubt that if this is what he's had,
they're needed for evening conversation with him, because the usual conversation is Mary, as usual, deep in the study of thorough base and human nature, and reading them some extracts from these, pretentious
threadbare morality.
Yeah. And then Catherine and Lydia had information for them of a different sort. Much had been done and much had been said in the regiment since the preceding Wednesday. Several of the officers had dined lately with their uncle. A private had been flogged, and it had actually been hinted that Colonel Forster was going to be married. So, boy, I love this. It's gossip, and they're doing dinner and they're getting married. Right within that is this private being flogged.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and again, I think it's interesting, like we were saying with the servants, this contrast of the
Hold on, for those who might not realize it, maybe it's what it is they're talking about a soldier who's being punished by being whipped, like strung up and whipped because he broke some rule in the military, and he's publicly whipped for that.
Yeah.
And it's
just
bloody,
fairly
it's a
brutal
bloody,
way
gruesome thing to see.
Yeah. But again, that there is there are ecosystems within ecosystems, and that there's a social performance, but as with the servants, beyond that, there's this whole other world happening, where there is also violence, there is poverty, there's all this other potential stuff happening, and things happen in a drawing room, but outside of the drawing room, that there's this whole other world there that is, and also too, that Catherine and Lydia don't seem to necessarily see the difference between things. It's all gossip to them. It's sort of slapped in the middle there. And isn't it nice someone's going to get married? That is interesting that they don't necessarily make the distinction between, I guess, appropriate gossip or, isn't this awful versus isn't this nicer, I guess. Yeah.
And it's not, I don't think we know exactly whether or not war is being conducted. I mean, certainly there's the long Napoleonic Wars, which is said, but there were breaks within that.
Yeah, it comes and goes. It's sometimes hard to set that.
And this might not be one, and this, because they're the militia, they're not the soldiers who go off to France anyway. The militia stays to protect England in case of invasion. So, and in the end, since they were never invaded by the end of the Napoleonic War anyway, that they never got to fight because they got to stay there, but they do lead a life of strict military
readiness,
but well, not with these officers, as we see going. That's a different world for them. The private gets flogged, the officers don't get flogged.
Well, that's it. Yes, I was gonna. It's important that no one in our social circle obviously gets flogged. That doesn't happen.
Well, that would
officers.
be disaster. That would be such a stain in your life. So and I don't think they would. I think they would just be stripped of their commission and kicked out.
Yeah, it is interesting though. Again, because throughout Austen, and again, periods of fighting, but then not fighting, and the militia always being present. As I do think that there is that constant semi-intrusion potential of there's violence here. These are men of violence who live with us, and any minute now a war could break out and we could be invaded. That I do think that's just an interesting, again, just sort of recurring potential element in Austen of hey, there's a militia, an active militia, always here. And yes, isn't it lovely we get to dine with the officers, but why are there officers? It's because there's this undercurrent of potential violence always.
And I wonder too if Kitty and Lydia are 15, 16, that I wonder if, because they're so young and have kind of almost grown up with this happening, like they may remember a time when there wasn't a war going on, but it's and that it's a commonplace thing within their world because it's always been there. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting because before the Napoleonic Wars, obviously there's the revolution, that there are uprisings in England. I do sometimes think, I think it's an certainly something underscored in Austen that there, I mean, this for all that Austen, I think, gets a reputation for being, oh, isn't it nice, kind of everything's happening in a drawing room. I don't think as an author she ever really, again, forgets or denies that there is violence in the world that she lives. I mean, I'm even just thinking again of something like Sense and Sensibility or Northanger Abbey. That the heroine in Northanger Abbey has to make a trip alone with no male chaperone, and the undercurrent of that is she's in a country that's at war. That's wildly dangerous for her to be doing this alone. It's and in Sense and Sensibility, even in domestic spaces, violence is enacted against women. That there's this structure, but I think Austen never loses sight of how potentially flimsy it can be and how fragile it can potentially be. That there's all this other stuff happening potentially in the background. And I think that's one of her definite strengths as an author, is that the stuff rears its ugly head occasionally, and you're like, oh yes, you are conscious of that. That is sort of just in the background of everything that we're seeing.
Yeah. And we'll hear stories, but more stories of war, or more of violence, committed against people of her own class. I mean, the relations that will happen, that we'll learn later.
Yes.
Way of dealing with these tensions that are going on.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
Jay-Nights, thank you all for tuning in today. Thank you to our show sponsor, Lisa Washington. Thanks to Deboarh Yaffe for taking a turn about the room with us. And thanks to all of you who have donated tonight. If you did or donated tonight or became a member, I'll give you a shout out in the next week's show. But right now, I want to thank those who donated in the last few weeks. And that's Doris W., who donated in person at the Rosenbach, came in, made a donation, said, make sure, Ed hears this is for Austen Mondays. That was really nice, Doris. Deirdre L. from Chilmark, Massachusetts. Elizabeth D. from Metuchen, New Jersey. Donna M. from Philadelphia. Carolyn W. from Philadelphia. Michelle H. from Philadelphia donated, and then Michelle H. also became a member too, so she doubled up on it. Thank you, Michelle. And Nicolette D. from Collegeville, PA also became a member, as did Suzanne C. of Philadelphia, Danielle A. of Philadelphia, and Kathy M. from San Francisco, California became a member. Rosenbach membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, and exclusive invitations to member-only events like our Rosenbach Ball, which is coming up on November 12th. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website. Thank you all for playing a part in the future of the Rosenbach and for allowing me to continue creating one-of-a-kind programs and courses like this one. Remember, we have an Austen Mondays Facebook group. Look us up on Facebook, and I'll post this Zoom video on the YouTube account, so they're all there together. And if that's how you're watching right now, thanks for watching. Thanks to Brianna, who was our chat Mrs. Reynolds. Thanks, Brianna, for managing the links in the chat. Remember, next week's episode 5, is going to be on Tuesday. Austen Mondays on Tuesday, November 1st, with Jocelyn Harris as our guest. And we'll explore chapters 13 and 14 when Mr. Collins arrives. That'll be a lot of fun. And Casey McMillan will be my chapter co-host for that. I can't wait to have Casey on the show. Kathleen, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. It was fun.
Always a pleasure talking Austen with you. This is really great. Thanks to Tucker Christine, who wrote our opening and closing credits music. Thanks to my daughter, Lulu, who shot and created the credits with me. Thank you all for tuning in. Farewell, readers. May the Darcys of the world never lose their good opinion of you. Bye-bye.
Bye.